Ladies and gentlemen, our program will begin in just a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, our program will begin in just a moment. Good day. Welcome to Advocacy Anywhere, powered by AJC. Advocacy Anywhere is AJC's digital platform that enables you to engage with AJC's global expertise, content, and advocacy from wherever you are. Today's program is brought to you in partnership with Jewish Insider. You can sign up for Jewish Insider's daily kickoff by visiting jewishinsider.com. We are delighted to be joined today by Senator Norm Coleman, the national chairman of the Republican Jewish Coalition, former U.S. Senator for Minnesota, and former mayor of St. Paul, Minnesota, for an assessment of the political trends within the Republican Party and issues of importance to the Jewish community. To hear part one of this two-part series, which looks at the Democratic Party and the Jewish community, featuring Mark Melman, CEO of the Democratic Majority for Israel, please go to ajc.org/advocacyanywhere analysis. As a reminder to our viewers, AJC is a nonpartisan 501c3 nonprofit organization. As such, AJC does not endorse or oppose political parties or candidates. Moderating today's conversation will be Jason Isaacson, AJC's Chief Policy and Political Affairs Officer. After we hear from Senator Coleman, we will take your questions. You may email your question to questions@ajc.org, questions is plural, or use the Q&A chat feature in Zoom. Jason, you have the floor.
Jillian, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's program on Jews and the Republican Party, which is a continuation of the discussion that AJC began 2 weeks ago, as Jillian just mentioned, on the political history and trajectory of the American Jewish community, a constituency diligently pursued by both major parties. Although the Jewish vote has skewed Democratic in national elections for decades, and this tendency has largely been mirrored in state and local elections as well, ending or at least eroding that Democratic advantage has long been a priority of GOP strategists. This year, with a Republican president who has again and again demonstrated his solidarity with Israel, and with voices on the left raising questions about America's traditional support for the Jewish state, the party is hoping for a breakthrough. And we're fortunate to be able to discuss the GOP's aspirations and expectations for the 2020 election and reflect on the forces that have shaped Jewish voting patterns over the years with Senator Norm Coleman, who represented Minnesota in the United States Senate from 2003 to 2009 and is national chairman of the Republican Jewish Coalition and is also a longtime friend of AJC. Senator, I'd like to pose a few questions to you and then we'll open it up for our national and global audience. But before I begin, allow me to thank you and welcome you to this AJC Advocacy Anywhere session.
Jason, let me return the thanks, return the welcome, and just a note of appreciation for AJC in both what it does, not just in terms of the U.S.-Israel relationship, which is obviously critically important to us in the RJC, groups like AIPAC and others, but also what you do at home, what you do in terms of the American Jewish community. Anti-Semitism, and I'm sure we'll get a chance to discuss it later on in the program, it's not just an issue in France. It's an issue right here. It's an issue on college campuses, an issue in this country. And so the leadership of AJC for American Jewry in terms of our Israel, and which is so central, at least to my being and to so many others in the Jewish community, and to what Jews face here at home, you've really been a leader and champion. And to that, I simply express my appreciation and the appreciation for this opportunity.
Oh, thank you very much for this, Senator. Let's begin. Before tackling the broader issues of political allegiance and how this year's campaign is unfolding, I think our viewers would be interested in knowing more about the Republican Jewish Coalition. What led to its founding in 1985? What role it's playing in the election? Could you offer a background on your group?
Yeah, it's a good question. Folks like George Klein, a couple, I'm trying to think of who's around. Many of our leaders are not with us anymore. But early on, in the Nixon administration, On the one hand, Nixon had a Secretary of State that wasn't necessarily the most favorably inclined to Jews on occasion, but in the Yom Kippur War, who saved Israel? It was Richard Nixon. And so you go back to that period of time, go back to some of the AWACS, a range of other things. There's always been within and by the way, we're a minority within the Jewish community. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. I never met either Republican or Lutheran until I went to college. I both thought they were kind of these strange, like religious sects or something. There weren't any around. My neighborhood was all Jews and Italians, and we had a couple of Irish kids. And so, and there's probably a long history, goes back, I think, to the Civil Rights Act of '64, even though Republicans were critical in passing that act, and Democrats were the ones who filibustered against it. Nevertheless, I think Goldwater was not for it, stood against it. Johnson was for it, and then John Kennedy before that, and so you kind of had a tradition going back to, as I said, where I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, there were no Republicans, very, 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 very few, and so we've been a minority within the community, but I have to tell you that when we reach out to members of Congress and to senators, we reach out to our donors. We tell them that the members of Congress that we support Israel. The members of Congress that we support oppose the Iran deal. They didn't vote for it. On the Democrat side, they voted for it. So we can say with I think a much greater degree of certainty that the folks that we support within the Republican Party are there unequivocally for Israel, and they have been. And those that aren't, folks like Steve King on occasion who said things that are just outrageous, we call them out and opposed them within our party. You don't see that in the Democratic Party today with Rashid Tlaib. You don't see that with Ilhan Omar, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that. And so in the end, you have an organization that is the Republican Jewish Coalition. Republican is first. So we care about the economy, we care about taxes, we care about regulation, we care about small business. So we care about those things. We care about things that affect Americans in their daily lives. But also, we're there for Israel. I was there for the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the liberation of Jerusalem. It was a special moment. I was there for the movement of the embassy, opening up the new United States Embassy in Jerusalem. Both things that were the embassy move made by President Trump, promised by many others, but a decision that he made, which I think and shows the level of commitment in the end, the follow through. So we're there for a range of, it's not just Israel, we're the Republican Jewish Coalition, and then we stand for those things that we believe make America stronger. It's not about more government, it's not about more taxes, it's not about more regulation, it's about more opportunity.
Senator, I have to ask you about the history of Jewish electoral support for Republican and Democratic presidential candidates. As you know, in recent history, the Democratic nominee has generally scored about 70% or so of the Jewish vote. Sometimes in the case of Franklin Roosevelt, for instance, and Lyndon Johnson, it's been as high as 90%. The last Democratic nominee to get less than a majority of Jewish support was Jimmy Carter when he ran for re-election in 1980. And he still got the larger share. He got more than Ronald Reagan. The last time a Republican won a plurality of Jewish support in a presidential election, and it was a plurality, not a majority, was Warren G. Harding, and that was 100 years ago. Why has this proven to be such an uphill climb in this community?
Well, again, I think I mentioned before, it goes back a little bit historically. It goes back to, again, even though Democrats opposed the Civil Rights Act, a large majority, they were the ones who filibustered. I think this was seen as, if you go back first, Franklin Roosevelt, the New Deal, Lyndon Johnson. Jews, we care. And I have to say, my friends on the other side of the aisle project that they care. My retort to that, by the way, is they say in Minnesota, we all know, no offense to any Norwegians or Lutherans out there, but we all know the Lutheran who loved his wife so much he almost told her. My friends on the left care so much that they almost do something. But the war on poverty hasn't solved poverty. The money that money that we put into public education hasn't made education better for those in our minority communities in a very long time. And yet, by the way, the public school teachers oppose things like charter schools. And so in the end, I think you have this, historical sense. You also, by the way, I'll just be very, very candid, a lot on the social issues. For our organization, we have folks on all sides of social issues. But, for so many of our landsmen, this where Moses comes down from the mountain with 2 tablets, right? And for some neo-launchment, they think that on one was written abortion and the other gay rights, and those are the only issues. Well, there are more issues than that, and within the Republican Jewish coalition, we have diverse perspective on issues like abortion. But in the end, we don't judge every person that we support based on that issue. We judge them based on their commitment to make America a better place. We judge them on their support for Israel. We judge them on the things that, again, I'll say this again and again, that Americans in their daily lives, when they kind of wake up in the morning, think about what's going to happen in my life today, the things that they care about, the job, the kids' education, the safety, America's place in the world, we judge them on that. But I think historically we face a challenge. And so for us, listen, the high water mark, I think George Bush, 24%. If we do better than that, if we do better than that, then you win places like Florida. And Trump won, I think, by 1.2%. We'll talk about, where we're going to focus our efforts. It's much like, by the way, in the African-American community. The Democrats typically get 90-something%, 95, 97. If Donald Trump gets 10%, 12%, he'll win the election. Same thing in Hispanic vote. There may be an overwhelming majority in one area, but so for us, it's a matter of reaching out to people, by the way, who care about Israel, who really care about Israel. Because if you compare where Republicans, Democrats today are on the issue, the spread is wide. Even though there's Israel support, which should be bipartisan, but unfortunately, there are voices of the Democrat Party that don't believe that, and they are loud voices, and they are setting agendas, and so. Again, we're not going to, do you think I'm going to get a majority of Jewish voters this election? No, but we keep working at it and reaching out to those who care about, what it takes to make America great, and also those who care about support for Israel. And so, based on that basis, I think this president will do better, than has been done in the past.
Senator, in your last response, you really basically talked about the differences that just a small margin can make in a national election. Jews constitute just over 2% of the U.S. population, but do command a significant amount of attention for every election. Why is our community such a prized and targeted constituency for both parties? How salient is the fact that the overwhelming majority of Jews live in states that have a significant impact on the Electoral College?
So talking about Florida, Florida, Ohio.
Florida, Michigan, Illinois,
right.
Obviously New York and California, which are seldom in play. But also, how do you wrestle with the fact that within the Jewish community, there are sharp political differences with greater affinity for conservative candidates among the minority who are Orthodox and greater affinity for liberals among the majority who are non-Orthodox?
Yeah, So first, we are an important community. We fight weight above our weight. Okay, I start with when our moms didn't raise dumb kids. Okay, and so Jews tend to be in any community, tend to be very, very active, tend to be very. It's who we are. It's the way we're brought up. We're a people of liberation, and we care about that. We care about liberating other people. We're a people of charity, of tzedakah. It's who we are. And so we tend to be more engaged. As I said, there are some folks who are kind of disengaged, not the Jewish community. We tend to contribute, all right, and involved, and that's true. Whether it's why the power of AIPAC is in part the political role they play, and the fact that they are very, very active in supporting candidates. And so we're there, and we fight above our weight, and we're in places like so the RJC will focus efforts in Ohio, in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, in Florida, and those, the handful of battleground state, a small number of voters in the Jewish community can make a difference. I mean, the president won the election in Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, by about 100,000 votes out of what was it, 130 million cast? I should know the number of that. I think something like that. And so we have the RJC is we've got grassroots, we've got social media, we got a $10 million campaign just on getting out the vote in the Jewish community for President Trump in those battleground states. So it's not about numbers. We're a community that is more active, that's more involved, that's more engaged, and I think that is listened to. Among the intellectual piece, that we're engaged in the discussion about what does it take to make America strong and make Americans safer. And so for all those reasons, you've got folks like me who spend time on something like the RJC because I think it's important to my kids, my grandkids, to America's future.
Now, I also asked about the differences within our community. Are there different appeals that are made to different streams within the American Jewish community?
Yeah, well, you have to. I mean, listen, you got to know your audience. There are those folks in the community who Israel is a prime issue, but not everybody. That's a reality, and it breaks my heart that more American Jews don't really care about Israel, about Israel's existence. Listen, we're baby boomers. I grew up, in the story of Israel's beginning, of Exodus. Marcus was the Brooklyn Jewish. So I got to remember his name. Who kind of built the Israeli. After I think Kirk Douglas played a Mickey Marcus. Mm-hmm. Kirk Douglas played in a movie, and he died because he didn't speak Hebrew in an accidental shooting right after the victory of Israeli independence. And so you're reaching out to folks with some different messages. There are folks, if they don't care about Israel, they may care about education, they may care about anti-Semitism on college campuses. And so, we do kind of reach out. The Orthodox, they certainly have the strong connection to Israel. And by the way, they're overwhelmingly supporting of Republicans. And so, yeah, you're exactly right. We have a diverse community, and that's a good thing. It forces you to kind of deal with a wide variety of issues and a wide variety of individuals, and we reach out to as many as we can. As I said, not expecting that we're going to get a majority this cycle, but if we can just increase our numbers to a certain degree, it can be a tipping point. It can make a difference in winning and losing in this presidential race.
Senator, let's drill down a little further on the Republican Party's appeal to American Jews before we unpack the 2020 election. You yourself identified as a Democrat, I've read as a liberal Democrat, and won your first elective office as mayor of St. Paul in 1993 as the candidate of the Democratic Farmer Labor Party. What happened during your first term as mayor of St. Paul, Minnesota, to change your party affiliation? And
I got to back it up. Okay.
Okay.
I got to back it up because I was a liberal in the 60s.
Oh, okay. So you started as a liberal, then you became a centrist or a conservative Democrat.
I ran against the endorsed Democratic candidate in St. Paul. I was the candidate of the business community. I was the conservative in the race, and so if you want to kind of the changeover from being part of SDS, head of the student moratorium, et cetera, fighting the system. I come to Minnesota and joined the AG's office, and I first started on human rights. I'm a human rights lawyer, trying cases, and then I wanted to do trial work, so I joined the criminal division, ultimately become the chief prosecutor of the state of Minnesota, and I learned that not everybody's a political prisoner. By the way, a lesson today that we should talk about in terms of the importance of having public safety if you have social justice. And so I also got married and started to have a family and paid a mortgage, and all of a sudden looking at taxes and regulation, and I had to develop a sense of what it takes to grow jobs in a community. When I was mayor of St. Paul, people used to ask me, Mayor, what are you doing for jobs today? I said, the best thing I can do for jobs is make sure mom and dad what are you doing for kids today? What are you doing for kids today? And my response was, the best thing I can do for kids today is make sure mom and dad has an opportunity for a job. This conversation around the breakfast table is a lot different if mom and dad has a job than if they don't. And so I ran as a conservative Democrat against the Paul Wellstone wing of the Democrat Party, was successful. And then when I governed, one of the first things I did is I rejected the AFSCME contract because it would have provided $200 million of unfunded liability for the city of St. Paul for a retiree health benefit plan that gave retirees, the city employees, full health care benefits for life for the family without a dime of employee contribution. And so it was, I was looking at my city that I thought we were losing the middle class. It was becoming a place of few haves and many have-nots. And so I rejected the AFSCME contract. I started 20 charter schools in St. Paul. I didn't raise taxes because, again, I thought we were driving out business. I cut regulation. And in the end, St. Paul experienced a great rebirth. Those policies worked. And by the way, they worked around the country. They worked for Brent Schundler in Jersey City. They worked for Steve Goldsmith. They have these Republicans. They worked for Rudy Giuliani in New York. And they also, by the way, and Ed Reardon in Philadelphia. They also worked for Democrats who governed. as Republicans, who took on the public employees unions, took on the teachers union. Rich Daley in Chicago, in many ways, I mean, he took on the unions. And so I looked at that and realized that I wasn't a Democrat. I was governing someone who believed in lower taxes, less regulation, greater public safety to create more opportunity. And so I ran as a Republican in a city that's about 70, 80% Democrat. And I got over 60% of the vote. I was the first Republican in St. Paul, I think for over 30 years. I'm probably the last Republican that will ever get elected in St. Paul. But my point being is I switched parties, but I didn't change a single position. I didn't have a new set of values. Those values that I brought to the table as conservative Democrat, I governed with. And I think today, as you look at what the Democratic Party, it's not the party of John Kennedy. It's not the party of even Hubert Humphrey. It is moved much further to the left. It's the party of, Bernie Sanders is setting the tone. AOC, as I said, Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, they're setting the pace. They're setting the policy for Biden on energy. They'll set the policy for Biden in terms of foreign relations. And so I think the Democratic Party left me. I never really left the Democratic Party. I think it moved so far to the left that I had a place to be, and I found that in the Republican Party.
Well, this actually raised an interesting question, Senator. So you say that the Democratic Party has really changed and taken on a new identity in recent years. The Republican Party also has gone through some changes. It's not the party of Arlen Specter and Jacob Javits, maybe not even the party of Norm Coleman, or is it?
No, I think it's listen, there isn't a unified, to be very honest, what's the unified vision of what makes Republican? I think there are a few things that we all agree on. So I think we agree that the creating greater opportunity, teaching somebody to fish rather than feeding them fish, the more government programs is the key to success. I think we believe that. We believe that means less regulation, means lower taxes. I think we have some differences on issues like trade. We have some. I don't think we're the party of absolute support for Israel, strong support for Israel. That kind of crosses a line across the board. But yeah, it's the party. It's not the party of Nelson Rockefeller, or Jacob Javits. It's changed in that sense. But I think some of those core principles are still there. The role of the role of government, America's place in the world, and support for Israel. Those things are unalterable. They have not changed.
Thank you, Senator. You raised the issue of anti-Semitism before. I want to drill down a little bit on that. The increased incidence of anti-Semitic rhetoric and actions, including deadly anti-Semitic attacks, have been much on the mind of American Jews in recent years. Early this year, the Trump administration's Justice Department conducted a first of its kind all-day seminar on anti-Semitism, in which I was honored to offer AJC's testimony. And the State Department's special envoy on anti-Semitism, Elan Carr, has been especially active and effective. What's your assessment of how the Republican Party is dealing with the issue of anti-Semitism against this background of government action, but also against the contrasting background of white supremacists who have associated themselves with the president and his agenda?
Yes, so I'm glad you raised a few things. I'd add one more to that list of things that this president has done that haven't been done before, and that's an executive order dealing with anti-Semitism on college campuses, which I think is a hotbed of anti-Semitism. So this president has been there in terms of his needs, of his acts. And by the way, anti-Semitism is not just a Donald Trump issue, not just now. Everyone watching this, all of our brethren understand that it's been with us forever. Go to France and try to Jews living in France today, talk to them. I remember one time being in Israel sometime about a year or two ago, and I was at a hotel in Tel Aviv, and I was by the pool. Everyone was speaking French. Everyone was speaking French. And then I participated in a program that with French Jews and others. And anti-Semitism in Europe is just, it's horrible. It's brutal. And so this is an issue that we have long felt, and this administration has taken steps to address it. And I'll give you an anecdote, by the way, and I'm going to tell you up front. So my AJC board, when President Trump ran, probably half of us didn't support the president. I was a never Trumper, in fact, before. And I remember Jason Greenblatt, who was President Trump's personal lawyer for over 2 decades. And you may know Jason.
Sure.
You do know him, obviously. Jason worked with Jared on the peace plan. And everybody knows Jason Greenblatt will tell you that this is a Hamish guy. And I got to tell you, when he came before our board and was asked questions about the president and about anti-Semitism, and not just that his daughter is Jewish, or son, but Greenblatt saying, I've worked for this guy for 20 years. Let me tell you where he is with Jews. Oh, and Jason, for those folks who don't know, is an Orthodox Jew, observant. Okay, and so I got to tell you, my board turned. Right today, my board's 100% the president, and so the president has been there. And let me be up front. By the way, do I think that his response in Charlottesville should have been stronger at that point? I took umbrage with that, and I called him on that. And I know what he was thinking, that there are within that group they weren't all white supremacists, but I just thought his tone, the language there was not helpful. Said that, but and I have to say this, and I may say it again. It's a really important concept. Steve Covey says that, and it's an old expression. Before Covey, the noted author, says we judge ourselves by our intentions, we judge others by their deeds. And what he says by that is that we're softer on ourselves. My Democrat really intend to solve, problems, but just simply throw more money at it, but it doesn't solve the problem. Intentions are great. I got really good intentions, but we judge others by their deeds. I judge this president by his deeds, by what he's done to address anti-Semitism. In terms of the special envoy, what he's done to address anti-Semitism, in terms of the forum that you participate in terms of what he's done with an executive order, what he's done to support Israel, and what he's done to grow the economy. And so in the end, if you look at what he's done in these issues, I think you'd have a sense that, he's done more than any president before him on these issues, more than Barack Obama did when he was in the White House, more than Barack Obama and Joe Biden did when they were in the White House.
Senator, when AJC conducts opinion polls of American Jews, which we do regularly, and asks what issues are their highest priority in elections, we generally find that Jews have the same concerns as the public at large, the economy, education, healthcare, crime. At the same time, of course, a candidate's support for Israel and the U.S.-Israel relationship is a high priority for American Jews. Given these findings, how would you weight the importance of President Trump's and the Republican Party's strong pro-Israel record in appealing to Jewish voters, many of whom may view such support as welcome, but kind of as a given, and be at least as interested in other policy positions?
Yeah, but it isn't. It isn't a given. That's the problem. It wasn't a given when Barack Obama, in leaving office, supported UN Resolution 2334. Which, by the way, basically stated that the Western Wall is not Jewish. it's not Israeli territory. We shouldn't have access to the Western Wall. If you follow through with 2334. And by the way, we abstained, but what we find out afterwards, we didn't just abstain. We orchestrated that resolution. We orchestrated it. On his way out, he simply kicked Israel in the butt. The Iran deal. The Iran deal represented an existential threat to Israel, but Joe Biden, Democrats supported that. And so this president has been very different. His support for Israel has been incredible, greater than he is, and Netanyahu said it, his best friend that Israel has had in the White House. And we've had great friends in the White House, great friends across the board, Democrats and Republicans across the board. But in terms of what he's done with moving the embassy, you recognize Jerusalem, common sense, is capital of Israel. I guess so. It's kind of where the prime minister is, but a problem. Okay, recognizing the Golan Heights, dealing with appointing Nikki Haley as UN ambassador, and finally taking on the anti-Semitism, blatant anti-Semitism that is pervasive within the United Nations. And so you have a president there who's been the greatest friend, strongest friend that Israel's had, running against Joe Biden, who was there in the Obama White House, who wasn't the greatest president. In many cases, as I said, I highlight a couple of examples, but they're powerful though. Iran deal, 234. Biden, by the way, opposing the taking out of Qasem Soleimani, the chief Iranian terrorist. And so you've got one president who has been there. You've got folks on the other side. It's not a given. That's my point. It's not a given. And in tough times, you want to be able to depend on your friends. And so, yeah, you can depend on this president. There is the challenge, Jason, you've laid it out, is that that's not the most important issue for everyone. And so we lay that out for those where it is important. The divide is great, and I fear, unfortunately, going to get greater because I see that the power and the influence of, and I keep mentioning, but it's reality, If you look at even the Biden agenda, economic agenda, environmental agenda, it's not the old Joe Biden that we knew. Okay, it's an agenda in which Ilhan Omar has a loud voice, in which AOC is leading the Green New Deal. Not very good, by the way, for my Midwest farmers. Not very good for those of us who want to fly from Minnesota to Washington on occasion. Not very good for American business. Not very good for our economy. And so in the end, it is not the only issue. There are other issues. But if you care about it, you should be supporting Donald Trump and the Republican Party.
Well, Senator, let me then turn to one of those other issues, which is very prominent, of course, in recent weeks, actually the last couple of months, the question of racial justice and the protests that we've seen around the country since the killing of George Floyd. Last week, AJC hosted a moving webinar honoring the late Congressman John Lewis, with presentations by the 4 surviving co-chairs of the Congressional Caucus on Black-Jewish Relations. John Lewis was also a co-chair of the caucus. And this included, of course, Republican Congressman Will Hurd and Lee Zeldin. Early last month, this Congressional Caucus on Black-Jewish Relations issued a statement that said, in part, and let me quote to you just one sentence, "Our country cannot achieve the values of justice for all until we address the structural inequality and ongoing racism that has long plagued this country." So I'd like to ask you, how do you see the issue of racism and the president's response to protests playing out in this year's election, and specifically playing out in the Jewish community?
So let me talk about policy, and then I'll talk politics. And policy is and listen, I'm Minnesotan. George Floyd happened not too far from where I live. The murder of George Floyd, terrible, brutal, and it certainly kind of lit a fire in across the country. Unfortunately, the fire is still burning, and so in many ways it kind of forces us to look at where are we at with social justice in this country, where are we at with racism in this country, and so those are powerful, and it's a needed reflection and then a need for action. But at the same time, you can't have social justice if you don't have order. If you don't have, so the folks that are trying to burn down the federal building in Seattle, in Portland every night, okay, and the violence that took place, by the way, in Minneapolis, when the mayor let them burn down the 3rd precinct. You burned down that precinct, and that was a spark that lit a flame across the country, and it told the criminals, not the folks that are burning buildings, that are looting. Okay, those are not protesters. Okay. That's not about social justice. It's about criminal conduct. It's opportunism. So in my neighborhood, the Lululemon was looted. Hey, that's women's athletic. It's not about social justice. The CVS farm, they were destroyed. The Super Americas burned down. That's not social justice. And so in the end, you need to have both. And I think my friends on the left have unfortunately kind of abandoned the night to the bad guys. And so liberal mayors in places like, by the way, Minneapolis and St. Paul, who let the fires rage until, by the way, the governor ultimately called in the National Guard. And when they got called in, everything quieted down. And then you could have, you need to have a foundation on which to have the conversation about social justice. So they're both important. But I think what's happened is that we've in the focus on one, George Floyd, has been lost by the violence, by the destruction. And in the end, I hope we can get back to a conversation and then action about what can we do to make the police community, the police, kind of more connected with the community. We actually did that pretty well in St. Paul. That was not a problem here. But on the other hand, when you got folks talking about defunding the police or saying we're going to kind of reallocate resources, that means defunding. If I'm paying you, X number of dollars and I say, now I'm going to reallocate those resources, I'm taking them, okay, we're defunding. I think that's crazy. That's insanity. And so in the end, in order to have social justice, and that's a conversation that needs to take place, we have to have order. And unfortunately, in a lot of these liberal Democrat communities, the mayors, the leaders, the governors have given up and simply turned the streets over to the bad guys. I don't think that serves the interest of those who care about what happened to George Floyd. I don't think it serves the interest of America. And I think you've got to deal with that. And that's what the president is doing. I give him credit for that. You got to deal with that You got to deal with it and not forget that, why we're here because we got to do a better job of dealing with community relations, police relations, racism, social justice. Strong answer to follow. Strong. I can tell I'm passionate. I was a mayor. I sat in that seat. I sat in that seat, and when our mayors, they by the way, even before this, they weren't addressing the concerns of small business during the pandemic. Okay, businesses were dying. The mayors weren't saying very little about that. And then, when the George Floyd incident happened, the murder happened. In the end, they didn't take control. We had an attorney general who, used it was a Martin Luther King statement, but it didn't reflect King's actions, was that rioting is simply the unheard being heard. No, rioting are people committing criminals, or arsonists, thugs, and they dishonor the memory of George Floyd. They dishonor those legitimate folks who want to protest and who want to have a positive change for this country and our communities.
Senator, I've got one final question before we turn it over to our viewers, and it's really kind of drawing back from the issues that we've been discussing, and sort of an environmental question, political environment. I think you'll agree that American politics has become increasingly toxic and tribal, and the United States Senate today, the world's most exclusive club, as it's been called, is less collegial than when you served there about a dozen years ago. Are you worried about this trend, and are we destined to suffer partisan warfare with all of its destructive and alienating consequences forever, or do you see the possibility of restoring or initiating an appreciation of common purpose and national unity?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I have to tell you, as I kind of look at the environment today, it breaks my heart. But let me just say this: this is not a new phenomenon. Burr killed Hamilton, shot him. We've had political discourse that has been, violent and intense, throughout history. But I think we're in a little different place today, and this is a longer discussion as kind of how we got there. Certainly when if you go back to 1980, over 2/3 of the Senate found themselves in the center. Okay. Today, the most liberal, Republican is probably more conservative than most conservative Democrat. There's just no overlap. We've lost that. We lost the center. A lot of it has to do with gerrymandering. A lot has to do with kind of social media, but we've lost but the center is still in America. And so my optimism is that the American heart is still a heart that wants to kind of get things done, that wants people to work together. The nature of the political system is the most radical on either side. All you got to do is win the election. AOC, she got how many votes to win an election, and all of a sudden now she'll be there. But I am hopeful. I'm a believer in America. I'm a believer in the American spirit. But certainly we're at a difficult point right now. The divide, and by the way, it's a divide where we live, urban, rural. It's a divide by the media that we watch. CNN, MSNBC, Fox, and other conservative outlets. And so it's going to take leadership ultimately to kind of pull this country together. And leadership, by the way, not just at the presidential level, but at the local level. We need governors and mayors and folks who have positions of responsibility to do those things that can kind of find the common bond that pulls us together as a country. So it's unfortunately we're in a bad place right now. It pains me, but I think that this is still a great country, and in the end, I have confidence that we'll figure out a way to move forward in a better place than we are today.
Senator, thank you. I think at this point, we'll open it up to questions from our viewers. Jillian?
Great.
Thank you, Jason. We're getting a lot of questions from our worldwide viewers. The first one comes from John Shapiro, AJC's honorary president in New York, who says, after Erdogan convinced Trump to reduce our presence in Syria, I had the privilege of spending a day and a half in a series of meetings with senior members of the IDF, Shin Bet, Mossad, US CENTCOM, and other intelligence personnel. The conclusion as voiced by the senior IDF general was Israel and Iran are on a collision course in Syria, and we have been abandoned by the US. What is the RJC's position on the administration's decision?
So I want to be careful about the RJC's position because I haven't polled my members. Let me give you Norm Coleman kind of responding, but I don't want to respond as your RJC. We do have, by the way, a legislative group, and there are times that we then pull together on legislative issues, such as, by the way, anti-Semitism legislation that we supported, President signed. So my concern, I tell you, I'm concerned that we don't do what Barack Obama did and Joe Biden did, and precipitously after the gains that we made from the surge. And I was there. I saw the game change in Iraq. It was settled, and Obama and Biden pull us out, and all of a sudden Al Qaeda kind of rises again, terrorism rises again, and we pay the price for that. I think if there's any good news is we're not total. I disagree some with the president's perspective on kind of America's place in the world in that region. But on the other hand, he's keeping our troops there enough to have a presence. I would like to be more robust, but I'm glad that there are folks like Lindsey Graham around the president who talk to the president. And we talked about this before, even within our party. On the one hand, you got the Rand Pauls who would say, let's just get us out right away. And you got folks like Lindsey Graham say, no, we need to maintain a presence there. We need to be involved. And so I'm glad the president listens to Senator Graham. I tend to align myself more with him than I do with Rand Paul on these issues. But I can't tell you that I agree with every decision the president has made. But I do, I understand where it's coming from. We all want endless wars to end. On the other hand, I'm a believer that a small American presence in some of these areas can make a big difference. At least that's the path that we're taking.
Thank you, Senator. Jillian?
Thank you. Our next question comes from Alan Heineman on Zoom, who says, I'm concerned about the recent attention given to those supporting a one-state solution and the impact it might have on students. You mentioned college campuses. From your perspective, why are colleges and universities in America the center of what it seems like anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, and what does RJC do to combat this?
It's a great question, and it reflects a great reality. And unfortunately, you've got folks on the liberal left. Okay, that's the center. You got to lay it out. Center of anti-Semitism on college campuses is on the right, not conservative groups. The center is on the liberal left. Those that call Israel an occupying state. Those that call Israel an apartheid state. And this is the strongest democracy in the Middle East. This is a democracy that recognizes the rights of women, gays, lesbians, et cetera, transgender, et cetera, et cetera. It is a free and democratic state, and by the way, it has Arab citizen representation. We're in the Knesset, and so what you have though on college campuses, you have college professors on the liberal left, indoctrinating college students. My son once called me from one of his classes right afterwards. He says, "Dad, I'm the only one standing up for Israel in this class, and my professor is talking about being an apartheid state." And so in the end, it's why the president's executive order on anti-Semitism on college campuses was so strong, basically saying, I'm going to take away your funding if you allow this to fester. I can tell you, I don't think the RJC is doing enough in that regard. I like, as I move forward to, in coming years, to be even more aggressive. I thank AJC for what they're doing. But I think it's a major issue within the Jewish community. And so just as we focus on support for Israel, we need to focus on anti-Semitism. And the hotbed of anti-Semitism is in college campuses. And the root of anti-Semitism in college campus is a liberal left who views Israel as an apartheid state. And I got to tell you, the best movement against Israel is anti-Semitism. Okay, that's what it's about. That is wanting to destroy the Jewish state. And it's being promoted on college campuses. And I think we got to be more aggressive in dealing with it.
Thank you. A lot of our other viewers are writing in about America's place in the world given multilateral organizations, including Josh Marcus on Zoom, who says, how do you think America's place in the world is being represented by the Republican Party given our withdrawals from global coalitions and multilateral organizations such as the UN and other bodies? Given the UN's extreme anti-Israel bias, is it better for the US to stay in and fight or get out?
So these are, by the way, great question. I don't think it's, first we have to recognize that what this president has done is he called the UN on account to account for its anti-Semitism, that the UN has X hundred resolutions against Israel and virtually nothing against Iran, nothing, I mean, literally against terrorist states, just nothing. So we're, they don't do anything with Assad in Syria, but they're very little, and they beat up on Israel. It really has been, unfortunately, kind of a center of anti-Semitism. That's changed a little bit. It's not a little more complex answer to this one. And that is, I think you've got to call these organizations to account. But at the same time, I don't think you need to totally disengage. So in terms of the UN, it may be that we decide what organizations to fund kind of based on how they operate. So if the Human Rights Council is going to ignore human rights around the world except focus on Israel, so we don't support a Human Rights Council. We're not part of it. I don't think this administration is totally withdrawing. I think with NATO, they didn't withdraw from NATO. They did what should have been done with NATO, and that they called countries to kind of live up to their obligations to put money into defense as they were obligated to do. No president had done that before. I mean, this president is a disruptor. There's no question about it. But some of these organizations need a little more disruption. So NATO needed it, and you got results. And you look at China. Listen, I've been a free trader. It's kind of where I come from. But I must admit that the president has called China on account, and everyone said the world would collapse if he kind of pressed China in terms of tariffs. He actually brought him to the table. If you look at NAFTA, which again I supported in the initial stage, but he gets a better deal. And so I don't think it's simple. I don't think it's fair to say America is withdrawing. I think it's fair to say that America is holding these organizations accountable. And simply, we're not going to be taken advantage of. That's rhetoric from the president, but I think it's fair to say that in our quest to be a great global citizen, I think we somehow ignored American interest. We ignored the interest of Israel at the UN for a long time. We ignored American business interests in China for a long time. We ignored American security interests with NATO for a long time. I don't think we're doing that now, but I would not advocate for withdrawal. I would advocate for accountability, but continued cooperation.
Thank you. Our next question comes from John Zeldin in Oklahoma City, who says, it seems that Minnesota tends to elect non-moderates on both sides of the aisle. Is this an issue related to an urban-rural divide or an insufficient immigrant integration program or something else? And is this a sign of where middle America is going in your perspective?
I keep saying great question, but they really are. I got to tell you, it's a great question. I don't know if though Minnesota is that different from a lot of parts of the country in which there is a big divide between urban and rural. And so the Minnesota State Senate is now Republican. That's because most of the seats there are in rural communities and some suburban. Strength of the Democratic Party of the urban centers. There's no question about that. If you look at a map of the country of the presidential election, and you see which counties that Hillary Clinton won, and they're just it's blue in the urban centers, blue in a couple of areas in the Midwest where the major urban centers are, in the South some urban centers are, and the rest of the country is red. That's Republican. Less people in that, which is why President Democrats can win a popular vote because they'll dominate in New York and California. But I don't. Again, it goes back to your question: do I think America can come together? I think that's what it takes leadership at the state level, at the local level, to try to kind of bridge the gap. I tried to do that when I was mayor. As mayor of St. Paul, an urban center, I had more in common with my rural neighbors. Because, by the way, St. Paul's was the second city to Minneapolis. They were the big urban center. They got everything. And so I always tried to find kind of common ground between kind of the value, the things that I was fighting for in St. Paul and what folks in rural communities are fighting for. And it's basic stuff. Jason, we started this conversation about jobs, education, security. Those are the real basics. And so Minnesota has the Paul Wellstones, and the Rod Grahams. And on the other hand, they got Amy Klobuchar. They had Norm Coleman. They had Tim Pawlenty as governor. I mean, and even now, the president, Tim Walz, president governor, he's played as a centrist. Unfortunately, I think he's being pulled, as so many Democrat leaders are, to the far left on things. But in the end, I don't think that we're kind of in this inexorable kind of division between urban and rural. I think there's still an opportunity down the road for kind of more centrist leadership. It's just a little tougher today for a whole range of reasons.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Marcia Green in Westchester, who asks, can you speak more to what you think a Biden presidency would look like for Israel? And can you speak to some of his past foreign policy decisions and how you see his approach to Iran playing out?
So I served with Joe Biden. Just an anecdote, I came back from Iraq. We had a large number of Minnesota troops, National Guard troops in Fallujah. in Anbar province, and this was like 2006, 2007. I originally kind of had opposed the surge, but I went there and my troops said, Senator, something different, something's happening here. We had a terrorist bombing, and our folks, we didn't get hurt, but we showed up at the hospital and gave blood. And the next day, the local leader and sheikh and governor came from the province, came in and said, hey, we want to work with you. Okay, the enemy is Al Qaeda. The enemy is the extremists. The enemy is Iran. It's not you. And so it was transformed. I came back though to the Senate Foreign Relations with Joe Biden, and I tell the story, and Senator Biden says, well, I've been to Anbar, 30 times, and nothing's going to happen. The surge is not going to work, et cetera, et cetera. Robert Gates, Secretary of Defense, when he wrote his memoirs, Duty, a book called Duty, he didn't criticize anybody. I got that book, except Joe Biden. And he said he's been wrong in every major foreign policy and national security decision in the last 3-4 decades. And so in the end, put personality aside, just on the decisions. Biden said that he would, didn't support taking out bin Laden. He opposed what Trump did in taking out Soleimani. He supported the Iran deal. He's on and on. He has simply been wrong on foreign policy issues. And my great fear, and it's a heartfelt fear, is that the Obama-Biden administration ended on the note of Resolution 2334 in the UN, a slap in the face, a kick in the butt to Israel, that's where they ended that last administration. I think that's a starting point for the next administration. And unfortunately, you're seeing the Bernie Sanders and the Ilhan Omars and the Rashid Tlaibs. Their voices are the loudest voices now. Biden has effectively adopted that agenda. And if the Democrats take over the presidency, the White House, and they have the House, if you have all those, they're going to get rid of the filibuster rule. And you're going to have one party, and that party going furthest to the left. And it's not just about Israel, but about every issue you can think about. They will do that, and they'll have free rein to transform America into a place that I don't think you're going to be comfortable with. I don't think you're, defund the police. Let's see where that goes, and on that level, taxes, regulation, et cetera, the Green New Deal on the environment, and of course Israel. And so in the end, I have great fear. If you've got one party rule with the Biden administration, the impact that will have, not just on the U.S.-Israel relationship, but on America's kind of character, what America's all about, and what it means to the average American.
Thank you. I think we have time for one final question before I turn it back to Jason. This next question comes from David Chaffetz in Sarasota. It seems that the left and others no longer believe in the right of free speech unless it agrees with their position. What can be done to stop this cancel culture that we're seeing in America? Does the RJC see this, and might you have some answers?
First, the problem is real. It really is real. I grew up in the 60s. Okay, and I out there and I protested, and I didn't burn down any buildings, but I believe that people have a right to challenge the system. But on the other hand, if we do it in a way that where now you can start with Christopher Columbus, and now you're tearing down defacing George Washington and Abraham Lincoln statues, and kind of just kind of forgetting who we are. Can't we allow there to be debate in this country? Can't we have forums of spirited conversation without destruction, without cancel culture, that if you're not in line with my, quote, progressive way of thinking, that somehow you're a criminal, that you can't support order, maintaining public order, and at the same time supporting social justice? I think you can do both. But a cancel culture doesn't allow that you're kind of put aside as a bigot, as a racist, if you question any of where the far left is going. And so that's the reality, and it's harsh today, and it hurts me. But I'll end where, Jason, I've said this a few times, my optimistic view about what America is all about, the fabric and soul of America, and relating back to my own Jewish identity, and kind of who we are as a people. And we are a people of liberation. We care about that. That's what we pass over. We celebrate liberation. We're a people of social justice. We're a people of compassion. But I also think we're a people of wanting results. That's critically important. We want to make sure things get done. It's not enough to have, I said earlier, good intentions. And so I think we're at a critical time in America. I worry that my friends on the Democratic Party are moving so far to the left that in the end you have cancel culture, you have defund the police, you have lack of support for Israel, you have more taxes, more regulation, Green New Deals. And so I think we've got to counter that with hopefully a philosophy that encourages individual opportunity, but with an understanding of kind of collective social justice that understands the importance of America's place in the world, strength, and that fundamentally understands as a Jew the importance of Israel as a Jewish state and its continued existence when the pressures all around it are such that put it at risk. And I believe that this Obama, if there is an a Biden administration, that I think a lot of that will be at risk, and that would break my heart. Thank you, Jason.
Senator, we've spent the last hour demonstrating why you were such an effective public servant, and also why you're such an effective spokesman for and chairman of the Republican Jewish Coalition. It's really been enlightening, I think, for all of our viewers, and especially appreciated by your friends in the American Jewish Committee. Thank you for spending this time with us and sharing your insights and your passion. This will not be the last discussion we will be having on these issues in the next 100 days. And I look forward to further participation with you and RJC and others in your party as we sort out the very complicated issues facing the country and facing our community in the weeks and months ahead. Thank you very much.
Let me just end where I began by thanking the AJC. Keep doing what you're doing, supporting the U.S.-Israel relationship and really supporting it, and also protecting the interests of Jews in America and the issues that impact all of us. So thank you for what you do. Look forward to continued partnership as we move forward. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you both for such a fascinating and timely conversation. And I also want to thank our audience for joining us and showing your commitment to the topics discussed here today. In these unique times, while so many of us are separated from our family and friends, AJC is still bringing us together on the issues that matter. Please consider making a donation to AJC so we can offer you more programs like this one, and so we can continue our advocacy work around the world on behalf of the Jewish people. Visit ajc.org/donate. And please join us on Thursday, July 30th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time for an off-the-record Advocacy Anywhere program exclusive for members of AJC's National Leadership Council and Marshall Society. To learn more about AJC's donor recognition societies, please visit ajc.org/support our work. And lastly, don't miss our next Public Advocacy Anywhere program featuring Elon Carr, the U.S. State Department Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, in conversation with Holly Huffnagel, AJC's U.S. Director for Combating Anti-Semitism, for a wide-ranging discussion on the recent rise of anti-Semitism in the U.S. and abroad. This program will take place on Monday, August 3rd at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. I hope you will join us. Please stay safe and healthy. Thank you all, and goodbye.